Welcome to the Being Human podcast with Amelia and Jez Francis. Brought to you by Just Add Water.
Hello, I'm Jez Francis.
And I'm Amelia. Welcome to the Being Human podcast, where we explore what it means to be human in this world we find ourselves living in.
Here we are again, Amelia, recording episode 2. And despite my involvement in episode 1, people appear to have enjoyed it. So you know what that means. We're in difficult second album territory. How are we going to avoid what's also known as the sophomore slump?
Yeah, the pressure is on. Well, today we're going to be talking about buildings and how we as human beings interact with them. A little bit later, we're going to be joined by the fantastic Julian Lipscombe, the award-winning architect behind some amazing places around the world, to explore his passion for placemaking, humane architecture and low-carbon design. So, Jez, speaking of buildings, how has the design of a building stood out to you in the last couple of days?
I've been thinking about this. My teenage daughter, who is a huge Tottenham Hotspur fan, took me to watch them play in the FA Cup against Portsmouth just the other week. So she'd been asking me to take her to a Spurs game for some time, and I've sort of been sticking my head in the sand for one reason or another. That probably won't come as any surprise
No,
to
don't
you,
worry,
Amelia,
Jez.
someone that knows me. But probably because of my recollection of some fairly boisterous crowds at the handful of football matches that I'd been to in my youth. But as is so often the case at our house when I do that, the decision was taken out of my hands. So she joined the Spurs online, bought 2 tickets and told me we would go.
Nice. Love that from Lily, making it happen because she wanted to go.
Yep.
My dad used to take me to Craven Cottage to the Fulham games. Me, my brother and my dad all had season tickets and used to go with some of our family friends as well. So totally get Lily's desire to go and watch the football and be a part of that. How was it?
It was brilliant. We had a fantastic day together. Certainly I enjoyed it. I think she did too. A very special father and daughter moment. So why am I telling you this? So you asked me about how buildings had stood out to me. Well, that new stadium is absolutely spectacular. I think it opened in 2019 and it's won a long list of international architectural awards and design prizes, I believe. You know, so as you're sort of walking up the road towards it, it's imposing, it's majestic, it sort of dominates the skyline, and it really stands out as a destination. And yet once we were inside, you know, despite my misgivings about crowds, I felt really relaxed and really comfortable. And whilst it was busy, at no point did I feel that it was, you know, desperately overcrowded. We were just able to move around really quite easily whenever we needed anything, a drink, a snack, a coffee, or the loo in my case. They just seemed to be there in front of us. And then for the game itself, although we were up in the gods in the cheap seats, you somehow didn't feel far from the action at all. The noise, the sound, the acoustic, the volume, it was just a really, really exciting experience. And the building itself and its design definitely contributes towards that. So it was my daughter's first Spurs game, and mine too, I have to say.
Is there a risk that she's going to want to go more and more now?
She did. When I looked at how much it had cost, and then she said, "Can we go every week?" I think the blood drained from my face. What about you, Amelia? Have any buildings or places struck you for a particular reason over the last few days?
So actually, I was having a conversation only the other day about how beautiful and interesting train stations are. There's something quite powerful about where a train station sits within a city, and some of them are absolutely gorgeous in terms of their architecture, but you know, where they sit and their use for at times millions of people going through them. And I think then there's also something on the other end of the spectrum about train stations that are in smaller towns and places, some perhaps a little tired compared to what they used to be, but they've all got their character and are such an important part of connecting those people who live in those small communities to where they need to be, where they're going and what journey they're going on. Train stations, no matter where you are an integral part to connecting people both towards their future and also their past.
That's so true. I think there's something really magical about stations and the railway. It takes us where we're going, but there's also a really strong link to a more simple, less frantic past, for sure. Interestingly, stations have, for me at times, really sort of amplified my mood as well. So I remember in a former life, you know, arriving at King's Cross in the morning, and arriving there would sort of signal the start of my day.
Yeah.
which at the time wasn't a particularly happy experience from a work point of view. But then in the evening, arriving at the station would be, that would flag the start of my escape.
Home time.
Yeah, home time, a sense of freedom. It would breathe life into me again and energy into me again. So stations absolutely, I think, are great examples of buildings that can connect with our moods and our emotions and the context that we find ourselves in any given situation.
You're so right about they hold an emotion and that triggers back, and they are can be a stunning piece of architecture that connect so many different places and people together and enable us to do so much. So I think, that's probably my observation of buildings over the last couple of days.
One of the things that seemed to go down well with those people that listened to our last episode, and I'm still not sure that this is a good thing, was it was the celebration of the frankly mundane moments of our lives as human beings that we felt needed more airtime. Basically.
Yeah, so let's give the listeners what they want, Jez.
Yeah, hashtag Mr. Brightside.
Yeah, here we are again playing boring things about me. You kick us off. Tell us a boring thing about you recently.
I'm actually quite proud about this one.
Oh dear.
In our house, we have argued for years about the correct way to put cutlery in the dishwasher. I have, since my earliest recollection, been 100% convinced that knives and forks and spoons should be put into the cutlery crate.
Is that the official term?
Well, for want of, I don't know what the term is, but for want of a better word, sort of handle down, so sort of pointy end up.
Interesting.
To ensure an efficient wash. However, members of my household have consistently ignored my recommendations over the years, and at times, I'm sure, to wind me up on purpose, particularly my kids who, on the very rare occasions they do help loading the dishwasher, delight in doing it wrongly, in my opinion. So the other evening I cracked.
Oh, God.
Yeah, and I did what anyone in my situation would do. I Googled it. And rather worryingly, as soon as I started typing it, the question sort of auto-completed.
So you're not alone in trying to discover the correct way to fill a cutlery crate.
So it turns out that I've been wrong again all these years. Safety, speed of unload and reduced germs all counted in favour of the pointy end down strategy. And there's even negligible difference in the quality of wash apparently as well. So there we are. I haven't told my family yet, of course. Wait until they listen to this.
Yeah. I have to say I'm with your family on that one.
So you think I'm wrong as well?
Yes.
Okay, well look, there we go. That's a boring thing about me. Amelia, what about you? Tell us a boring thing about you, please.
So when it was snowing last month, I was setting off on my commute, on my day to work. And as I was at the front door, I thought, I'll do a lovely thing for the flat and I'll take the bin bag down with me on my way. I know bin bags as well. It's a sort of double whammy for boring things about me. But anyway, so got to my front door and there's about a 3-metre gap from the door to where the bins are at the front, of which that was completely covered in snow. So my concentration... obviously after having taken a picture of the lovely snow to put on my Instagram story, obviously, the concentration started of walking in the snow, not slipping. I am now at 3/4 of the way to the station and I still realise I am holding my bin bag that I have not put in the bin, of which I go, right, what do I do now? Proceed to walk all the way back to my flat, passing industrial size bins that are on the side of the street, on the way back to put the bin back in my bin to then walk back to the station again, which then ended up making me late for work. But bins and snow is a harder task than I thought it was going to be.
Brilliant. Okay, Amelia, shall we talk about why we chose buildings then as our topic for today?
Yes, great idea. I think it's fair to say that you and I, Jez, if we put our cards on the table, neither of us know very much at all about the design of places or anything about architecture. But we're curious because, like almost every human being on the earth today, buildings are a part of how we live our lives every day in so many different ways.
Yeah, it's a very good point. From the trip to the shop to buy a pint of milk to those once-in-a-lifetime moments, births, weddings, the departure point for adventures, as we were talking about earlier on, and the moment when we say goodbye to our loved ones and celebrate their lives.
Yeah, I think when we got talking about this, we both felt this interest to the idea of exploring how physical spaces in which we live, we work, we play, influence both our emotions and our physical health too.
So we know, for example, that access to nature is great for dealing with stress. So can variation in architectural design reflect the naturally occurring complexity of green spaces and so help to soothe our troubled minds? And how can the design of buildings help us to overcome the awful experience of feeling alone and isolated in some of the most densely populated places we know? Can buildings and the way they're designed encourage more social connection and all the good that comes of it?
Some fantastic questions there, Jez. Ones that we don't have the answers to, and many others that we thought of. But we do know a man that might. So let's welcome Julian Lipscombe to the Being Human podcast. Julian, thank you so much for joining us. Before we dive into your world, would you mind if we asked you a couple of questions just to help us and our listeners get a feel for who you are and what makes you tick?
Absolutely. Go for it.
First of all, what brought a smile to your face in the last few days?
Am I allowed to mention football?
You
Yes.
are.
Well, I'm a lifelong Southampton supporter. Through thick and thin, mostly thin. In the last week, I've been subjected to one of the worst performances I've ever seen, and then one of the most glorious performances last week. So in the course of a week, we go from major losers to giant killers, and it just sort of, I don't know, charts something about the human condition, I suppose. It's the full range of emotions. My word, it's character building, and it teaches you something about loyalty as well. A great human quality, I think.
Funnily enough, we were just talking about a football experience I had not so long ago with my daughter. So it brought a smile to my face when you mentioned that. Julian, do you have a favourite quote? Who said what, and why do you like it?
I love quotes. I really do. The only problem is I have the brain of a goldfish and I can never remember them. So I've got books and books of quotes. My mum passed away recently, just before Christmas. And so I've been thinking about that a lot and reading around that and the subject of loss and things like that. And there was a really lovely quote that I came across the other day. It's by somebody called Emily Dickinson. And it says, "Unable are the loved to die, for love is immortality." And that just struck me as really amazing because, my siblings, my dad and I have been talking a lot about, the life of our mum, wife. Her presence in our lives is still, very much there. She may have gone, but she hasn't left us. And that just seemed to sum it up very beautifully, very poetically.
Yeah. Sorry to hear that, but thank you for sharing that. That's really nice touch to think of family members that might not be with us, but their presence and who they are as a person always stays with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Their influence on our lives is never ending.
Another question for you, and we happen to actually be chatting about trains a little bit earlier on, but if you were to sit next to someone on a long train journey, who would you want it to be and what would you talk to them about?
Could I ask for two people?
Oh, Jez, what do you think?
I think we'll allow it, yeah.
It's two people, one theme.
Okay.
And it's something that's captivated me all my life. I was 4 years old when Neil Armstrong stepped on the moon, and it's just stayed with me ever since, the wonder of that adventure. And so I think I would like to sit on a train with Neil Armstrong if we could bring him back from the dead and, talk to him about what was it actually like. What did he see? What did he feel? I'd love to know a little bit more about that. And then the person I'd love to have sitting alongside him would be one of my heroines, is Katherine Johnson, who is the NASA mathematician who did a lot of the incredibly complicated maths, which enabled Apollo 11 to do what it did and to come back safely. And she was a woman in a male-dominated world. She was also a person of colour in a white-dominated world, and she did extraordinary things, and I've always greatly admired her.
That's a good duo to have with. We'll allow that on this occasion.
Thank you very much.
Julia, what did you want to be when you were growing up?
Can you guess?
An astronaut.
Absolutely, an astronaut.
Yay.
And thereafter, I wanted to be a pilot. When I realised that astronaut probably wasn't going to be the thing I could do, then pilot was my next obsession. And actually, I tried to get into the RAF. I tried to get into commercial airlines, and I wasn't quite up to the mark. My coordination wasn't quick enough. So my dad, for the only time in my life, intervened. And he said, well, don't sit around at home moping. Get out there, do something, and then by all means go back and try again. So I went down the list. I think it was called UCA in our days.
Yeah,
the UCAS. Went down the UCA list. I was in the A's, came to architecture, and I thought, hold on a second. Well, my brother's an architect. My brother-in-law is an architect. My dad always wanted to be an architect. Well, I'll give that a go. And 30 or 40 years later, here I am.
Before we do dive into all sorts of things in your world of work, can we just hear what is the most boring thing about you?
Naturally, I couldn't think of anything. But then as soon as I asked my family, there was a kind of stream of things that came out. But the one that seemed to come up consistently is obsession with mowing the lawn.
Nice.
Do you mulch, Julian, or do you collect your sort of grass clippings and sort of dispose of them?
I don't even know what the word mulch means.
Jez, I don't mulch. I wish I could. I wish I did, but I don't. We don't quite have the room for that, but I should. It's the next stage of my obsession.
Brilliant. Well, look, thank you for answering those questions so honestly. I think we have an insight into who you are and what makes you tick now. Let's move on to your work. Can I ask you to explain what you do and, more importantly, why?
So I'm an architect, but I'm also an urban designer. So I sort of operate at different kind of scales, from buildings all the way up to large parts of cities. Why do I do what I do? It's not just because I couldn't get in to be a pilot. I do it because I love what I do. I'm passionate about what I do. I like the thought of creating buildings and places and spaces that genuinely improve the quality of people's lives, to make people feel included, to make people feel welcome. Yeah. You know, one of the things about what we've all just been through is I think we've all realized how important, coming together is. It's reminded us that we are social animals, that we need to be together. We thrive when we come together. And so if we can create buildings and spaces that support that, then, that's why I do what I do.
Have you got an example or piece of work that you've been involved in that can sort of bring that to life for us?
Probably the best example I can think of is King's Cross. Which is a scheme that that we have been involved in. We're not responsible for the master plan or the placemaking there. Others have done that, and they've done it absolutely brilliantly. The streets are alive, the streets thrive, the streets are really nicely proportioned, they have good daylight, they have other things like that. And the spaces that they connect are really good, they have a magnetic quality to them, they pull people in. But you can find those kind of qualities in a lot of modern regeneration schemes. Yeah. The thing that particularly appeals to me about King's Cross is, I would argue, that it is a fundamentally London place. There's just something about the bones of that place that when you're in it, I always find I'm very clear. I know where I am. Now, obviously I know where I am, but I would, with any visitors that I take with me, and I take people regularly to look at it because I think it's such a brilliant example. They get that sort of vibe of its, that energy of London, that sort of, the quirkiness of London, the historical core of buildings at the heart of King's Cross, which just gives, those kind of connections, but also speak about, a lot of those buildings in the heart of King's Cross are to do with, Victorian times, that whole process of getting food and goods into the city to feed the people of London. And the buildings that were created for them are very beautiful in their own right. But the people creating them never imagined that a building like the Granary, which was designed to process grain and get it into the streets of London, would become one of the most eminent arts universities in London and the world. So there's that kind of lovely sense of buildings that have one purpose on day one, and then they go on to have different purposes throughout the entirety of their lives. But they have that. An evolution, and they have all of that sort of history within their bones. And when we are taking historic buildings like that, what we try to do is to keep as much of that story, as many of those memories or ghosts, as you might call
energy.
them, of the
There's an
past.
energy about the
Yeah,
past.
absolutely right. Some people will be very conscious of it. Some others will be just walking around not knowing quite why they're getting the reaction or the emotions that they're getting, but you just feel it in a sort of visceral way. And I think that's for me when architecture and placemaking gets super exciting.
When you're starting a new project that's involving placemaking, where do you begin with something like that? Like, who is it that you need to speak to?
I mean, the most important thing is to go to any sort of new opportunity with an open mind and with open eyes, and very, very importantly, open ears. I know places in this country pretty well, but we're doing quite a lot of work abroad in places like Greece and India. And so the most important thing is to have every sense alert, so that you're absorbing everything that needs to be taken in. You don't go there with preconceptions. You certainly don't, as an architect operating internationally, go there with the arrogance to think, well, I know this place. What this place needs is some of my stuff. What you need to do is to go there and say, right, okay, what is this place all about? What is the culture about? What is the climate about? Very importantly indeed, and create buildings that speak to all of those. And so how do we do that? That is about collaborating with local people to make sure that we properly understand what we're doing. So if I'm doing a scheme in Manchester, a lot of time spent walking the streets, looking at what the city's all about, talking to local people, and sort of looking at heritage and other things like that, as opposed to the work that we're currently doing in India, in a vastly different climate, but also working with a client who they are devout Hindu. They have a spiritual belief system at the heart of their company and at the way in which they create buildings. So we have absorbed that, contemplating the impact of one's decisions based on what the gods might deem the right thing, and what's sort of celestial concerns, or some other spiritual energy. It's just amazing.
Yeah, definitely. Have you got an example of one specific thing that you've had to incorporate in your work in order to make sure that you have included the religious aspects that perhaps anywhere else you might not have needed to?
Yeah, there's a sort of a mythology that sits behind Vastu, and it's all related to quite a lengthy story about gods and a god and energy, and the way in which different things are placed relative to the figure of this god as represented on the ground. And there are lots of examples. So that the god is laying prostrate on the floor, and with head in northeast corner, feet in southwest corner. So if you are doing a development, you have to place your most sacred thing in the northeast corner. And in that part of the world, water is a really scarce resource. So you tend to put, if you've got water, you put it in the northeast corner. If you're starting a development, you start it in the southwest, the bottom of the body. And so all of those things are woven together into this set of principles, which has been a joy to work with.
Yeah.
So, Julian, what human qualities do you think are essential to the work that you do, and why?
There's lots of sort of expected traits, creativity, imagination, endless curiosity, being empathetic to people. I think all of those are really, really important. I think the thing that I have always focused on, though, is about clear communication and very particularly listening to people. There is a danger when you become expert in something that all you want to do is broadcast.
Yeah.
You don't want to receive. I think that's fatal. One of my passions in architecture is about communicating the joy of architecture in the built environment. I've spent a lot of time over the years. I love public speaking. That's my sweet spot. But sort of talking to members of the public about what the built environment is all about, what architecture is all about, what architects want to try and achieve. And so, that whole process of, communicating that and using language which isn't overly technical, using language which isn't pretentious, just sort of trying to talk in plain English so that people comprehend what you're on about, but also can connect, with what you're trying to say. Yeah, I think listening and clear communication are skills that I come back to a lot because it's paramount.
We were wondering that and you've touched on it as well today, that there's an energy in architecture and buildings like there is in nature. When you go on a walk and you get that energy from your surroundings, how can you use buildings to sort of lift our mood in the same way that, a walk in the woods or a walk in the mountains would? Yeah, absolutely. Architecture and the built environment has the power to do that when we get it right. There's a lovely quote by, there you go, I've remembered a quote. There's a lovely quote by Churchill. You may know it. He said, "We shape our buildings, and thereafter they shape us." And I think that's true. So true that if you get buildings and architecture in places right, they can start to have an influence on one's daily life. There's a very large scheme that we did in the city of London, where the first thing we did was not to look at the buildings, but was to look at the new square that we were creating and to look at the qualities of it, to make sure that at lunchtime, when people come out of their office buildings into the square, that there would be sunlight for as much as the year as possible, so that you can sit there and have a sandwich in the sunlight. And then we shape the buildings around it to make sure that central civic community purpose was achieved. So playing with light is one of the key things that we do. And of course, at the moment, sustainability and well-being are really, really important parts of what we do. They are fundamental to all modern buildings. And in sort of large corporate office scheme at the moment, there is a big preoccupation with amenity space, outdoor amenity space, the provision of that, unheard of 10 years ago. Yeah.
Greenery, biodiversity, biophilia, healthy buildings, well buildings that have really good quality of air, that make you feel inspired and invigorated by them. And having come out of COVID, where we were all isolated in our bedrooms and spare rooms and what have you, there's an even greater emphasis, I think, on creating buildings that celebrate the coming together of humanity and that facilitate as well. Office buildings need to change because we don't need to go to work to do work anymore. But what we need to go to buildings for is to meet our fellow human beings, to interact, to collaborate, to energize, to create. That's so much easier than when we are together. And we also need to encourage people to go to the office. And so the way in which companies are set up, and the way in which buildings have that thing I was mentioning earlier about a magnetic quality, where people think, do you know what? I don't want to work at home in my spare room. I would much rather go to the workplace because it's exciting, it's vibrant, there's loads of people around, it's a really cool environment. Whatever it is that makes people tick, that's one of the things that we need to focus on.
So, Julian, what are some practical tips you might be able to share with us to help us be a bit more aware of our surroundings, to be able to tune into some of that positive energy that you describe in the built environment?
The first one is to look up.
Yes, very true.
The amount of times you're staring at the pavement instead of what's around you.
You're staring at pavements, and nowadays, of course, you're probably also staring at your phone and about to walk into lots of people. But before that, we were, when you were moving through cities and towns, your eye would be drawn to the retail environment or the street level. But if you just lift your eyes up above that datum line, and you look at the architecture of the buildings that sit above and the place above, you see all kind of fresh things, because you start to look at your environment, and it's probably an environment very well. You see it afresh, you see it anew, and it just gets you interested in that. So look up, look around, take in what is around you, but then also, if you are happy with what you see, well, great. If you're not happy with what you see, well, do something about it. Get stuck in. Petition if you like, or sort of try to get involved in the sort of planning process and start to influence that and be active. Don't just sit there and complain. Get stuck in and try and do something.
We're very good at that.
Yeah, I was going to say British people are very good at tutting at the sidelines and not doing anything about it.
That's been my mantra all the way along, and both in my professional life, but also in my personal life. And where if I see something I don't like, I will get stuck in and try and do something about it. So one of the things I did a few years ago was to improve the quality of one of our local schools. because a lot of the parents were complaining about the poor facilities, the this, that, and the other. And I thought, well, just get off my backside, use my professional skills, and try and do something about it. And we did. The school is regenerated. It's looking far better than it ever did. And, that kind of thing is as rewarding as, some of the larger scale professional things that I do. So, yeah, get stuck in, I think.
Julian, thank you so much for giving us such a fascinating insight into the world of buildings and placemaking.
It's an absolute pleasure. As you can tell, I love talking about that kind of thing. And if you'd like to have a guided tour around King's Cross sometime, let me know, and I'd be delighted to do that.
I think that's an outside broadcast. That sounds like. Yeah.
Oh yeah, okay. And it's recorded, so I can't retract it. So there you go.
Brilliant.
I'm so glad we picked that topic. I had not realised, on reflection, I definitely looked down at the floor way too much. So I'm going to be looking upwards from now on. What are you going to do, Jez?
So I'm going to try and be a little bit more tuned into how buildings and places kind of impact my emotions and my mood. And I'm going to look up. I'm going to try and look up a bit more as well. I'm also going to try and get myself along to a local planning meeting or two.
Okay.
I think that's right up my street. Just to see the extent, in all seriousness, to see the extent to which people and their needs, both physical and emotional, are being considered in the sort of developments being proposed around us.
Yeah.
Well, look, Amelia, I think that's the end of episode 2. I hope you've enjoyed it.
I absolutely have, and I can't wait to see where we go next on the Being Human podcast.
You've been listening to the Being Human podcast. Brought to you by Just Add Water. Nurturing individual brilliance, forging collective strength.
I've totally forgotten what I meant to say. I'm so glad we picked that. Here we go.
I'd like to thank our sponsors.